In Nairobi's richest neighborhood stood the grand mansion of billionaire Kwame Osei, a man whose name alone carried fear and respect. His wealth built empires, his power filled boardrooms, but his home had been silent for 5 long years. Since the death of his beloved wife, Kwame had shut himself away from the world. He no longer smiled, no longer gave interviews, no longer hosted the glamorous parties that once lit up the city. Even his staff whispered about him in hushed voices, saying his words, when they came, were short and sharp like a blade. Some believed grief had stolen not just his heart but also his voice. The mansion, with all its shining marble and towering chandeliers, became a tomb of silence, where footsteps echoed louder than laughter. People passing by wondered what secrets hid behind those heavy gates, and if the man inside was still alive in spirit or only in body. They thought the world would never hear him again, that his silence was forever. But fate had other plans. One stormy afternoon, a ball rolled across the polished hallway, chased by a small pair of feet. A little girl, innocent and curious, pushed open a carved mahogany door. Inside the vast study, surrounded by books and shadows, sat Kwame himself, his pen frozen in his hand. For the first time in years, his eyes lifted to meet another's, not an employee, not a guard, but a child. And with a voice rough from disuse, he whispered one word, "Who?" Alma and Jerry lived in the shadow of the great mansion, not in the grand rooms filled with gold and glass, but down in the servant quarters where the air smelled of soap and hard work. She was young but her back carried the weight of the world. Every day before the sun rose, Alma tied her scarf, put on her worn uniform, and began her work. She scrubbed marble floors until they shone like mirrors, polished crystal glasses until they sparkled brighter than diamonds, and carried laundry baskets heavier than herself. The guards in the mansion hardly looked at her, but when they did, she kept her eyes low. She had learned to move quietly, to make herself invisible, because in a place ruled by power, a maid's survival depended on silence. But Alma's life was not just about work. Hidden behind her tired eyes was a story that no one knew. She had a daughter, Zara, a bright little girl with big curious eyes and a heart that never stopped asking questions. Zara was Alma's joy, her reason to keep going when life felt impossible. Yet Zara was also her greatest burden, because the child carried a truth that could break everything. Alma told people her husband had left her, that he had abandoned them, and that was why she struggled alone. But the truth was far more dangerous. Zara's father was not gone, not in the way everyone thought. His presence was carved into the very walls of the mansion where Alma scrubbed floors and wiped dust. Every evening, after the long hours of cleaning, Alma would hurry back to her small room where Zara waited. The girl would run into her arms, her laughter filling the tiny space with light. "Mama, where is my father?" she would ask again and again, her little face tilted with innocence. Alma's chest would tighten every time. How could she tell her daughter that her father was not some nameless man who had walked away? How could she reveal that Zara's blood was tied to the mansion above, to the man who lived like a ghost behind locked doors? So Alma stayed silent. She smiled at Zara, stroked her hair, and whispered stories that danced around the truth. She said, "Your father is far away, my child, but one day you will understand." Zara believed her for a while, but children grow fast, and with each passing day her questions grew sharper, harder to avoid. Alma feared the day Zara would see through her answers. She feared even more what would happen if the master of the house discovered what she had been hiding all these years. Alma's secret was heavier than poverty, heavier than loneliness. It was a secret that could destroy her job, her safety, and her daughter's future. And yet, no matter how heavy it was, she carried it every single day, moving silently through the mansion, cleaning the rooms of the man whose life was forever tied to her child's. Alma always told Zara to stay downstairs, to never go near the grand staircases that led to the upper floors of the mansion. "That is the master's world," she warned her softly, "and children do not belong there." Zara would nod, but in her young heart burned a flame of curiosity. The upstairs felt like a forbidden land, a place of secrets and shadows. She often imagined what it looked like beyond the carved doors, where the man who owned everything lived like a ghost. The stormy afternoon when it happened, the rain hammered against the windows, and thunder rolled like drums in the sky. Zara was playing with her red ball in the wide hallway when it slipped from her hands, bounced across the polished floor, and rolled toward the staircase. Without thinking, she chased it. Her small feet tapped against the marble steps as she climbed higher and higher, her heart racing with a strange mix of fear and excitement. She knew she was not supposed to be there, but her ball led the way, and she couldn't stop herself. At the top, the ball slowed, finally resting against the leg of a huge mahogany door. The handle gleamed like gold. Zara's tiny fingers pushed against it, and with a soft creak, the heavy door swung open. She stepped inside and froze. The study smelled of leather and old paper. Books climbed the walls, and the curtains were drawn against the storm. At the center, behind a massive desk, sat Kwame Osei himself. His back was straight, his suit dark, his hand holding a pen that hovered above a page. For years, no one had dared disturb him. His staff knew better than to enter without permission. But now, before him stood a little girl, trembling but unafraid, her eyes wide as she clutched her ball to her chest. Kwame lifted his gaze slowly. His eyes, sharp and piercing, locked onto hers. For a moment, time stood still. The storm outside seemed to pause, as though the world was waiting for what would happen next. He studied her face, her small frame, her innocent stare. The pen in his hand shook slightly. Then, with a voice that was rough, hoarse, and broken from years of silence, he whispered a single word. "Who?" The sound filled the room like thunder, though it was barely more than a whisper. Zara blinked, unsure if she should answer, unsure if she should run. But she didn't move. She just stood there, holding her ball, her heart pounding like the rain outside. In that moment, it was not just a child meeting a stranger. It was the meeting of two worlds, the silence of a man who had buried himself in grief and the innocence of a child who had wandered where no one else dared to go. And in that single word, "Who?" the mansion's silence cracked open for the first time in 5 years. Alma's heart nearly stopped when she saw the open door. She had told Zara 1,000 times never to go upstairs, never to disturb the master of the house. Her blood ran cold as she rushed into the study, ready to beg for forgiveness, ready to pack her bags because she knew this mistake would cost her the job that kept her and her daughter alive. She burst into the room, breathless, her hands trembling as she pulled Zara close, shielding her small body behind her apron. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please forgive her. She didn't mean any harm." But something stopped her. Kwame Osei was not shouting. He was not angry. He was trembling. The mighty billionaire, the man whose silence had frozen his entire household for 5 years, was staring at the child as if he had seen a ghost. His hand shook, the pen slipping from his grip and rolling across the desk. His lips parted, and his voice came out low, hoarse, but heavy with power. "Alma," he said slowly, his eyes never leaving the child's face. "Whose child is this?" The words crashed into the air like thunder. The room grew heavy, as if the walls themselves were listening, holding their breath. Alma's chest tightened. She pulled Zara closer, trying to hide her behind her skirts, but Zara peeked out, her wide eyes innocent and unafraid. Kwame rose to his feet, unsteady but commanding, his gaze locked on the little girl. His eyes, once cold and distant, now burned with something she could not name, pain, longing, maybe even recognition. Alma's lips trembled. She wanted to lie, to say Zara was no one, just a servant's daughter. But the way Kwame's stare pierced her made it impossible. He looked as though he already knew, as though the truth was carved into the child's face. His voice broke again, stronger this time, filling the room like a storm. "Alma, tell me now. Whose child is this?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Zara clutched her mother's hand, confused, unaware of the storm building around her. Alma could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She wanted to run, to take her daughter and disappear before the truth tore everything apart. But Kwame's presence rooted her in place. His hand was trembling, his body shaking, but his eyes, his unblinking eyes, were demanding the truth she had buried for years. Alma held Zara tighter, her nails digging into her palms, her breath shallow. She had carried this secret alone, hidden it in shadows, but now it stood exposed in the middle of the grand study, staring back at them with wide, innocent eyes. The silence that had ruled the mansion for 5 long years had shattered, and in its place came a question that could change everything. That night, Alma could barely breathe when one of the guards told her the master wanted to see her. Her knees felt weak as she walked the long, cold corridors leading to Kwame's private chambers. She had imagined this moment many times, but never like this. The door opened, and the room glowed with soft light from a single lamp. The air was heavy, and on the large desk in front of Kwame lay a pile of yellowed documents, old wills, bank papers, and what looked like medical reports. He sat there in silence, his posture firm, but his eyes gave him away. They were searching, restless, filled with something more than anger. He gestured for her to sit, but Alma remained standing, clutching her apron, her heart racing. Slowly, Kwame picked up one paper from the pile and slid it across the desk. His voice, though rough, was steadier than earlier. "Alma," he said, his eyes fixed on hers, "this child. Zara, she is not just your daughter." Alma's breath caught, her eyes darting to the paper. It was a report, one she had prayed would never see the light of day. She shook her head, tears threatening to spill, but Kwame continued, his voice cutting through her silence. "She is mine." The words hit her like a hammer. Alma's hands trembled, and she pressed them to her chest as if to keep her heart from breaking through. For years, she had hidden the truth, convincing herself it was safer that way. She had told Zara her father was gone, had buried the past deep inside, and had hoped it would never resurface. But now, here was the truth, laid bare on a table in black and white. Kwame leaned back, his face shadowed by sorrow. "I knew the moment I saw her," he said quietly. "Her eyes, they are the same. She looks so much like." His voice trailed off, and for the first time, Alma saw him not as a billionaire, not as a master, but as a man carrying unbearable regret. He wasn't just grieving his wife, he had been punishing himself for mistakes, for choices that had chained him in silence. Alma's tears finally fell, hot and heavy. She wanted to speak, to explain, but her voice was trapped in her throat. All she could do was shake her head and whisper, "I only wanted to protect her." Kwame's gaze softened, though his jaw remained tight. "You kept her from me," he said, his words not angry, but wounded. "But I cannot blame you. I left too many wounds behind. And yet, fate has brought her back to me." The room was so quiet that the ticking clock on the wall felt like a drumbeat. Alma stood there trembling, while Kwame rested his hand on the papers, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her shiver. The silence that had wrapped around him for 5 years wasn't only grief for his wife, it was the prison of regret for the child he had never known. And now, that prison had been broken open by a little girl who carried both his blood and his chance at redemption. The news spread faster than fire on dry grass. Servants whispered in corners, guards exchanged nervous glances, and by morning, the entire mansion buzzed with one shocking truth: the silent master had spoken. And not to his board members, not to politicians, not even to family, but to a maid's little girl. It was a moment that shattered the walls of secrecy, and by the time the sun rose, the world outside those gates had begun to stir. Within days, rumors spilled into boardrooms and newspapers. The mighty Osei Enterprises, a company worth billions, now faced a storm brewing not from markets or rivals, but from inside the mansion itself. The board of directors was outraged. To them, the thought of a servant's child being tied to the name Osei was unthinkable. "A maid's daughter cannot sit where heirs belong," they hissed in closed meetings, slamming their fists on polished tables. For years, they had waited like vultures, circling the empire, expecting their share when Kwame finally broke. And now, here was a girl, innocent yet dangerous, standing as a crack in their golden wall. Lawyers gathered, their briefcases heavy with threats. Journalists sniffed around the gates, hungry for scandal, their cameras flashing whenever a car entered or left. The silence that had once protected the mansion was gone, replaced by the chaos of voices, accusations, and fear. Every headline carried the same question: who was the child? And what did she mean for the future of Osei's empire? Inside, Alma felt the weight of the world pressing against her chest. She had once cleaned those shining floors quietly, invisible, unimportant. Now her daughter's name was on the lips of powerful men and women, spoken with venom, spoken with envy. Zara, who only wanted to play with her ball and laugh in her mother's arms, had unknowingly become the center of a war. Alma no longer moved through the mansion as just a maid. Every step she took was watched, every word she spoke measured. She felt cornered, trapped in a battlefield she had never chosen. Kwame's estranged relatives arrived, dressed in fine suits, their smiles sharp as knives. They came not to welcome the child, but to protect their share of wealth, circling around like predators. In private, they whispered cruel things, questioning Alma's worth, questioning Zara's blood. Some demanded proof, others threatened to destroy anyone who dared claim what wasn't theirs. Alma held her daughter tighter at night, praying no harm would come to her, but she knew prayers alone could not stop the storm. The mansion that once echoed with silence now roared with conflict. It was no longer just about wealth, it was about power, legacy, and pride. And in the middle of it all stood a little girl who had no idea that her laughter and her name had shaken an empire to its core. For Alma, the job of cleaning halls had turned into the fight of her life, because now her daughter was not just a child. She was a weapon, a threat, and a target. The mansion had not seen such a gathering in years. Long tables were set, chandeliers blazed with golden light, and the air was thick with perfume, tension, and whispers. Every seat was filled with powerful faces, Kwame's relatives dressed in designer clothes, board members with sharp eyes, and journalists waiting to capture history. They believed this was the day the old billionaire would finally speak about succession, perhaps name one of his nephews or nieces as the future of Osei Enterprises. Some whispered he might even announce his retirement. No one expected what was about to happen. The hall grew quiet when Kwame entered. He walked slowly but with presence, his cane tapping against the polished floor. For years, people had wondered if grief had broken him forever, but that night, his voice was strong. He didn't sit at the head of the table as everyone thought. Instead, he stopped in the middle of the hall, and with a steady hand, he beckoned someone forward. From the corner of the room stepped little Zara, dressed in a simple white dress Alma had carefully ironed. The crowd shifted uneasily, frowns appearing on faces used to power and pride. Kwame rested his hand gently on the child's shoulder. The cameras clicked, flashes lighting up the hall. Then his voice rang out, louder than the chandeliers could shine, deep and commanding after years of silence. "This child," he declared, his hand firm on Zara, "is my granddaughter. She carries my blood, my spirit, and my future." The room erupted in chaos. Gasps filled the air, someone dropped a glass that shattered across the marble floor, and one woman clutched her chest before fainting into her chair. The board members exchanged furious glances, relatives whispered in horror, and the journalists scribbled as fast as their hands could move. But louder than all the noise was Kwame's booming voice, cutting through the uproar like a blade. "You will respect her as you respect me. This house, this empire, will no longer be bound by silence. It will live again through her." Alma stood frozen at the edge of the hall, her heart pounding as she watched the scene unfold. She had spent years hiding Zara, protecting her, never daring to dream that one day the most powerful man in the country would stand before the world and claim her child. Her eyes filled with tears as Zara looked up at Kwame with innocence, not fully understanding the storm she had just been placed in the center of. The cameras flashed again, capturing the moment that would ripple across the nation. The Osei family's empire was no longer about money and power alone, it now carried the weight of a little girl's name. That night, in the glow of chandeliers and under the eyes of the world, Kwame broke his silence not with grief, but with a roar that demanded everyone listen. And for the first time in 5 years, the hall that once echoed with emptiness was filled with life, with shock, and with the beginning of a new story. The next morning, the mansion felt different. The heavy silence that had ruled for years was gone, replaced by a warmth no one could explain. Servants peeked from the windows in disbelief as Kwame Osei, the man who had lived like a shadow, stepped outside into the gardens. But he wasn't alone. Beside him walked Alma, her heart still racing from the chaos of the night before, and skipping happily between them was Zara, her laughter ringing louder than the birds in the trees. For 5 years, no sound had dared disturb the empire's walls. Now, laughter echoed against the marble, filling every corner with life. Kwame bent down to listen as Zara chattered about the flowers and the butterflies. His deep voice, once thought lost, returned with stories, simple, playful tales told to a child who had unknowingly pulled him back to the world. Each word was like a stone lifted from his chest. Each smile was a piece of the man he used to be returning. Alma stood quietly, watching. She had seen Kwame as cold, distant, unreachable. But now she saw something different. She saw a man reborn, not through money, not through power, but through the small hand of a child who reminded him how to live. His laughter, once buried under grief, rolled across the garden like music. Alma realized then this was not a story of riches or inheritance. This was about innocence healing wounds no doctor could touch, about a little girl's pure heart breaking chains of regret. The world had waited 5 years for Kwame Osei to speak again. And when he finally did, it wasn't business or power that filled his voice, it was joy. Sometimes, the loudest voices truly come from the smallest feet.